Excellent. Well, welcome everyone, and good morning. Hope everybody's staying as safe and healthy as can be. I know this is a difficult time, of course, for everybody as we try to adjust to this new normal, if you could call it that. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has changed the way that we do everything from research to teaching to collaboration, the way that we're working together, which is really the topic of today. I should say, though, for some of you who I haven't seen in a while, that it's been, despite having to stay home and despite all of the setbacks, of course, that we've all had to deal with, I've been heartened and inspired by the so many stories of resilience, even just on UCI's campus. The heroic efforts, UCI Health, hearing what they're doing on the front lines is just incredible. As of yesterday, I think the hospital has had 12 cases so far, but they are working around the clock, of course, to try to test and help as many people as possible. Our faculty, I guess many of you know this already, have had to transform their classes all to online instruction for the spring, and students who have had to deal with their lives being really upturned by this pandemic have been doing everything they can to make sure they maintain their progress. But it's interesting, one would think maybe this is not the best time for training, but actually I think it is. I think that there's no better time for us to adopt new tools, new approaches, to start thinking outside the box a little bit about how we can use digital resources to work together. And I think that maybe the pandemic has rushed us a little bit into having to do some of these things, but they're here to stay. So, this is a way for us to be able to provide resources so that we can all learn how to do collaboration, how to work together, how to identify partners and potential opportunities. And for UCI Brain, of course, the main goal is in service of brain science, what the initiative is all about. But recently also, as many of you know, as we've sent out a Zotmail about this, we have wanted to extend this to our colleagues who are doing COVID-19 research. And certainly Dimensions has also made available resources for COVID-19 researchers. So we're sort of all in this together, and we're delighted that you can all join us today. I know that schedules have actually gotten more hectic, believe it or not, with people working from home, and you're constantly on Zoom. So taking this opportunity to join us today is really appreciated. I won't say much more. I would just like to introduce my colleague, Ms. Liz Tomic, Senior Solutions Account Manager of Digital Science, who will take us through our first part of the training here today. So with that, Liz, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Michael. It's so nice to have everybody join us today. Heidi's actually going to be doing much of the presenting about dimensions. We have 3 sessions set up. You can kind of come and go as you need to. The first session will be basically an overview about the dimensions and how you can use it. The second session will be a little bit more about finding collaborative partners and working collaboratively. And then the third session will be a kind of a Q&A session where you can ask questions that are specific to what you're trying to look for in dimensions. So with all of that said, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Heidi to go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, we are gonna go through this as quickly as possible so we have time for questions. This is the basic agenda for this overview. This is intended to get you familiar with the platform, how you can use it, what the functionality is, and give you some additional information about support and user groups. I'll provide the slides to Michael and Diana afterwards as well, so you'll have that. So first of all, what is Dimensions? Our senior management calls it a linked research knowledge system. It's a database. It's a very fancy term for a database. It's a database on steroids. It brings multiple content types into a single place so you can improve and make more efficient discovery and analysis of research. Okay, let's keep going. So the impetus behind developing Dimensions was we wanted to look beyond just publications and citations when we talk about research. There's so much more that goes on. Starting with the moment a grant is awarded. We have grants in Dimensions that are active as far in the future as 2049. We get our grant information directly from funders. I'll get into that into a minute. But again, that gives you the ability to have some insight into research that's going to happen that hasn't even started yet. Obviously, after the grant is awarded, research is conducted, it's presented at conferences, data sets are generated. That is the latest content type to be added to Dimensions. Not to diminish the importance of publications. We have obviously publications in Dimensions, but even at the point of publication, before citations accrue, you have people talking about the research on Twitter, increasingly academics. I think there's someone that's unmuted. If you could mute, that would be awesome. We capture all of that news, Twitter, social media attention via Altmetric, and we bring it into the platform. And then obviously citations accrue. But beyond that, was this research cited in a clinical trial? Did it result in a patent? Are policymakers talking about this research? So this much broader landscape is why we created Dimensions. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but another advantage to Dimensions is not only do we have all of this data in one place, we've linked it. So where we're able to say that this publication resulted in a clinical trial, we surface all of these links for you. So it's a very powerful database. So what's in Dimensions? I wanted to first just give you a quick snapshot specific to the coronavirus outbreak that illustrates the fact that, you know, this is not just an ANI database. Beginning in January, you can see the different content types as they appeared in Dimensions, from journal articles, preprints, data sets, clinical trials, grants. There's so much content here, and we update it so frequently that you really get the most recent information available. I wanted to talk quickly about where we get our data from. So our publications come from a number of sources, primarily Crossref, where publication DOIs are minted, PubMed, Europe PMC, JStage and Japan Link Center are Japanese language sources. One of the advantages to Dimensions is that we have an increasing number of preprint servers. So again, this is with an eye to giving you the most advanced insights on research possible. Archive was the last to be added. There are more in the pipeline, including PsycArchive. In addition to that, so we have about over 100 million publications in Dimensions right now. Of those, you can full text search over 75 million of them because we have direct relationships with publishers. So even if your institution doesn't subscribe to a certain journal and you are tempted to buy or rent that journal article, you can look for very specific terms, drug names, very field-specific terms. Make sure that they're in that article before you decide to make that purchase decision. It also gives you a much broader scope when you're looking at literature reviews and things like that. Another advantage to using Dimensions over other ANI databases. Also wanted to show you again the advantage to Dimensions is that we update daily. So compared to something like Scopus or Web of Science, if we look at COVID-19 related publications since the beginning of the year, you'll see that the volume in Dimensions is much higher. Particularly because these other sources don't include preprints. We just added data sets, so you'll see on the right side of this slide where we're getting these data sets from. This will continue to expand. We're very excited about this. It's the latest data source in Dimensions. You can filter by research organization, funder, researchers, and much more. The grant data, I think, is especially, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. Let's see what's happening. Do we have access to Elsevier papers? If they're open access, yes. If they're not, no. We don't subscribe, we don't provide full text access. So you can search the full text, but we won't actually be able to provide that article to you. So the grant data comes from funders directly. In my role previous to joining digital science, I worked in the strategic planning and grant evaluation department at a funder. We bought Dimensions because it was the most comprehensive grants database we could find. We have over 500 funders around the world included, and not just federal national funders, but private foundations like Gates, Robert Wood Johnson's. We've just added Kellogg, and we get this information directly from the funders. So unlike other sources where they scrape the funding information from the acknowledgement section in publications, we get this information directly from the funders. That enables us, again, to provide you with grants information that goes into the future. So where nothing has been published yet, you'll still be able to see the funding information that's been awarded. So this is a massive advantage in my mind to Dimensions and compared to other resources you might have. We have patent data in Dimensions. We're currently working on building our back-end infrastructure in order to bring in everything we can from our sister company, IFI Claims. If you've ever looked at Google Patents gets their data from IFI Claims. So this content will expand exponentially by the end of the year. We're particularly excited about Chinese and Japanese patents being added. And then clinical trials. So this goes beyond just clinicaltrials.gov to a number of registries around the world. The last one we added was Iran. This will continue to expand. And then we also have policy document data. So there's a sample on, there's a sample list on the left side of the slide that shows you where the organizations from which we gather these policy documents, and then we extract references from them. So we're able to say, what research they're citing in these policy documents, which again goes to the impact of the research that you're producing. I'm going to stop for questions right now. Let's see if there's one in the chat. Okay. First of all, I just want to start with basic navigation in the platform, and we're going to do this live, so it's not all a slide deck, I promise. It's basically, this is the Dimensions platform. It's basically broken down into what I call 3 panels. On the left side, you have filters. So this is where you're going to look for things like people, places, research organizations, time limits, publication types. These change according to what content type you're in. As you'll see when we get into the live part of the demo, grants will have filters such as active year, start year, that obviously don't apply to publications and so forth. The middle panel is your result set. So whatever search you perform, this is where your results are going to appear in different content types. You can sort them in a different number of ways. You can export them all. And then on the right side, which is my favorite side, are analytical views. So these function very similar to a pivot table for your result set. So you do a search, you get 5,000 results. We do the analysis on that result set, and we pull out the researchers, the organizations, the funders, and the research categories for that result set. So you get instant analysis inside the platform. You don't have to download this and do this, an analysis outside of the platform based on an Excel export. Last but not least, the search bar. This is where you enter your search terms. This is where your filters that you've selected will appear. And this is, again, just the basic layout of Dimensions. There are a number of ways to search in Dimensions. So as I mentioned before, because we have agreements with over 130 publishers, we have a full data search option. So you can search the full text of over 70, this is now 75 million publications, even ones you don't have access to. So this is going to give you a larger result set. But again, this is something that you can't do in a lot of other platforms. Title and abstract search is just like what it sounds. It's limiting your search to the title and abstract. It will give you a smaller set of results than a full data search, but probably more specific and relevant. And then we have the abstract search, which is by far the most popular feature in Dimensions. So in lieu of creating, a 20-term Boolean search where one paragraph will throw the entire thing off, you can, when I do trainings like this one, technically it's called an abstract search. I call it the blob of text search because you can drop literally anything in there. So it could be a conference session, you're trying to organize an event, you have a session description, you can pop that in there, a project summary, an article abstract, any piece of text you can put in there. We will extract terms and concepts from that description, and we will search across every content type simultaneously to find highly similar content. This is going to be very specific, so the results will be smaller than either full text or title and abstract search, but it's going to be extremely similar to the description that you put in. I don't recommend it if you don't have significant detail in that search. So for example, if you type in, please help me, abstract search, you're not going to get anything useful out of that. In publications, if you know exactly what you're looking for, you can enter DOIs. You can enter multiple DOIs using an OR Boolean function. Eventually, this is going to change. It's on a roadmap to make that a little bit easier to search for more than one publication at a time. This only applies to publications. So those are the different ways to search in Dimensions. I'm going to stop now for questions before I can go into the use cases. And if we don't have any.
Heidi, this is Liz. I just wanted to, can you just say a little bit more about the abstract search and why someone might want to use that in the way you described?
Yeah, I'm going to actually get into that later on. Yeah, so it's coming. There's multiple use cases for that. But to address Liz's question, if I have a project summary, for example, and I'm looking for funders, I can plop that in and I can see who's funding highly similar research to that description. If I want to see, find researchers that are performing very similar research to that summary, I can discover them that way. I can also look at where that research is happening across the world. Just going to check the chat real quick. Is there a list of private foundations included in the database? I will show you when we get into the platform how you can find the funders. There is a complete list that you can search of all funders included in Dimensions. Okay, I'm going to actually keep going, and I'm going to save the questions for after the slides, if you don't mind. So I just wanted to start with publications. So this is a number of use cases for the publication data and Dimensions. So we make it easy for you to find journals that are appropriate for submission. You can discover leading researchers in a given field via the analytical views. You can investigate the attention that your research has received. So this is an example of a search that I did. I picked an RCDC categorization of neurosciences. I added a search term for sleep in title and abstract. And I want to look at recent publications, so I've limited to the past 3 years. If I open the analytical view panel and look at source titles, I can see where a majority of these publications have been published. And not only that, I can see the citations to that set of publications and the citation mean. So this is, again, will assist you in determining which journals to submit to. You might want to look at a number of metrics. There, in addition to citations, we have a field citation ratio. which is an attempt to field normalize the citations. You can look at that as a metric. You can look at the attention that has publications have received. So if that's a priority for you, that might be a factor in where you decide to submit. Again, there's just tons of data that we can provide you to contextualize this research. Same search, again, now I'm just, instead of clicking source titles, I'm looking at researchers. So these are the researchers that have published. Again, I haven't changed my search terms or anything. I've literally made one click up to researchers. Now I can see who's published the most in this, according to my search terms. And again, I can see the relative metrics associated with this, citations, citation mean, and again, you could change that to FCR. I'll show you in the platform. I promise you this is not all slides. You can also then limit to your institution. So if we limit to UC Irvine, we can see, and I check this box, I only want to see the researchers that are publishing in this area recently. Hopefully these things will be familiar to you. So you can limit to your institution. You could limit to another institution if you wanted to. There are multiple ways to search using filters.
Is there a way to download the results of publication searches?
Yes, you can export an Excel file. So you can export either a CSV or Excel exports. The download limit for analytics is 50,000 records at a time. You can do that multiple times a day. It's just a per download limit. So if your result set is 100,000 records, you'd need to break that up. Usually I do that by time. So I do, by year. And you can also save these searches as favorites, so you don't have to reconstruct them every time. There's a number of ways to sort. So we're looking at publications right now from Irvine, again, recently published, related to neurosciences and sleep. If I want to see the research that's getting the most attention online, I can sort by altmetric attention score. This will bring to the top the research that's receiving the most attention that's been published. If you click into that publication record, you'll see an altmetric badge. You can then click on that badge and you can actually read the news stories, see the tweets, the Facebook posts, the Wikipedia entries related to this research. As we're all aware, not all attention is good attention. So having the context behind that is really important. It's not enough in our minds to just give you a count of the news coverage. If this research is being roundly trashed, for lack of a better word, you want to know the context behind that, and you can get that in dimensions. Okay, I'm going to check the chat before we go to grants. Okay, I will answer those questions at the end. So grant data, these are a number of use cases for the grant data. Again, because we have grant awards active well into the future, you can get an understanding of what's happening next, what's upcoming, what's already been awarded. Because it's global, you can investigate an expanded funding landscape. So you're not just looking at NIH Reporter, for example. We have again, 500 funders around the world that you're able to investigate and identify. You can also, with respect to like possible recruitment or hiring, you can identify researchers that have already secured future funding. You can find out where your peer institutions are getting their funding from and who it's going to specifically. And you can examine funding trends by particular funders. This is a search that I did. Again, this similar search, neurosciences is an RCDC category. I've entered sleep and title and abstract search, but now I want to look at grants that are active into the future and who's funding them. So these are the top funders. Again, we're looking at this analytical view panel in grants I'm clicking on the funder tab, so now I can see the top funders, their aggregated funding amount, and the number of grants that fall into this active year range. Now, if I back out of the timeline and I just want to look at a trend, you'll see that there are a number of visualizations you can use. So we're still in this funder tab and grants, but now we've moved to timeline. So I can see over time the number of grants related to my search by each particular funder. You can remove funders and add specific funders to this chart. You can export it as either an image, or you can export the data behind the chart if you want to do additional analysis. You can adjust the year, the time period that you're looking at. But again, it gives you a trend. In this case, we're looking at starting grants. The other option is active grants over time by funder. So you can see, for example, the National Institute on Aging has significantly increased the number of starting grants related to our search. Again, very quick analysis of trends in funding that you don't have to do a lot of work. I guess it's a couple of clicks to do this in Dimensions. Now we're looking at researchers. So again, this goes to what I was talking about before about looking for researchers that have funding secured in future years in this particular area. So we've just, again, one click moved from the funder tab to the research tab and the analytical views, and now I can identify the researchers. I can click through anything in blue. You can click through and examine those grants in detail and find out exactly what they're working on and who their co-PIs may be. For example, this surprisingly is all in the same place. And then we have another feature in the analytical views that is a compare feature. So in this case, I've just compared UC Irvine with the UCLA, and we can see their funding. We've removed any time parameters here, but you can investigate now, like, okay, they're getting a lot of money for neurosciences. You can dig into where they're getting their funding from. So again, this gives you some competitive intelligence on other institutions to inform strategic planning around funding. Another thing you can do in Dimensions, so when you're in that view, every funder will have a hover over that says open chart. And what this will show you is, and I'll show you this live in the platform as well, the top line is their overall budget over time, so annualized. So this is everything that they've funded. The bottom line is what they've funded on an annualized basis relative to your search. So you can see if they're funding more or less over time related to the research. And again, you could be doing an abstract search here. You could be doing full text search, any way you want to search. This will show you their funding relative to that search over time. So you can identify trends. This will, again, this helps inform strategies around funding. You might not want to go to the top funder if they're actually funding less in that area. And this, again, very quick analysis, and you can export that data as well from the platform. Okay, I see a bunch of questions in the chat. Oh, okay. Let's see. Just studying the results shows papers from, yes, we have papers that go back to the 1600s. So I highly recommend, especially if you're looking for a collaborator, that you put a time limit on your search because you want them to be, alive. Definitely, it's amazing how much content there is, and the more content that is made digital and is assigned DOIs, again, because we bring in data from Crossref, we're able to pull that data into Dimensions. It's really, it's quite impressive, but it's also a cautionary tale to put time limits on your search if you're looking for recent collaborators. And then the other question was, I did not find a way to have analytics including all of this period of time. Yeah, so you can adjust those timelines. You can adjust the years on the timelines, but the default is the past 10 years for the most part. I hope that answers your questions. Okay, we're going to move on to clinical trials. So with clinical trials, again, we have we have registries from around the world, so you can discover recent, upcoming, ongoing clinical trials. You can compare clinical trial activity. You can identify the researchers associated with those trials. So again, same search, neurosciences and sleep, but we're looking at clinical trials now that are starting within this 3-year period. So there are 1,000 of them. If I then open the analytical views, I can see the researchers that are associated with these trials. I can again click into the trials and look at them in more detail. We have UC San Diego, UCLA in here. Again, if you're looking for potential collaborators, looking to build teams, this is something that you might want to look at as well. And then we have the compare feature as in every content type, I think, except for policy documents. So you can compare the clinical trial activity at your institution versus another institution, again, pretty easily. And you can dig into exactly what they're doing. Patents, I think, are the most underutilized source of data in dimensions. And I think it's also because of a little hesitancy because they are so complicated. You do not need to be a patent attorney to take advantage of the patent data in dimensions. You can look at what research is being commercialized. You can discover who the major corporate players are in any given field based on their patent applications. And you can identify companies, and this is, I think, the most significant, that might be suitable to approach for investment, collaboration, partnership, sponsorship for events, and you can drill down very specifically. So in this case, I'm looking at a search, again, neurosciences and sleep, just to keep it consistent. There's a way, and I'll show you in the platform. I don't want to look at other universities. I'm only focused on corporations at this point. So there's, if I had the ability to have a bigger screenshot here, there's an additional filter where you can exclude research organizations, which is universities in general. And then I can even get more specific. So in this case, I've drilled down to, I only want to look at companies in California that I might want to collaborate with. So I can see the top companies that are filing patents related to my search. And then not only do we have institutional profiles and researcher profiles and dimensions, we have company profiles. So I can look at Arena Pharmaceuticals and I can look at their patents and I can see if there is a natural intersection with what we're doing and what they're doing and whether they would be suitable to approach for investment, partnership, or collaboration. And the nice part about dimensions is you can drill down and make that local or you can make it global. It's totally up to you. Briefly wanted to talk about the API, which you do have access to. So this will allow you to do queries that you cannot perform in the UI. A prime example of this is if I want to know how many patents cited research published by my organization, that's a query you can do in the API that you can't do in the UI. That's a primary example, but it's very flexible. We have very comprehensive documentation for it. There are some examples. So you can systematically retrieve data. You can one-off retrieve data from manual reporting. You can integrate this with other systems you have. You can create dashboards, etc. I'm going to stop now before we get into the good part, which is not the slides, the platform itself. Let's see if there's any more questions. Okay, so there is a question about how can research development staff use dimensions? How can administrators use it? Deans of schools? Yeah, so again, the analytical views is where I live in dimensions, because it gives you this high level insight. So because there's, and let's just get into the platform. Close that. So make this a little bit bigger. So this is the platform live. One of the things that you can do with Dimensions Analytics is form groups. So if you want to look at, you don't want to see where you, and I hate using the word rank, where you place relative to a group of peers, you can create a peer group. So in this case, ASU on their website has a list of 15 or 16 institutions. Where are they? Oh, sorry, that's not what I meant to do. So I've created a group of ASU and all of the institutions they consider peers. When I apply that filter, what that does is when I do any kind of search, so if I want to see how, and I'm going to pick, for example, right now, a research category. There are a number of research categorization systems. Fields of research is the most broad, probably least relevant to you as at UCI Brain. RCDC codes, we have health categories. We just added recently ICRP cancer types and UN Sustainable Development Goals. Units of assessment applies primarily to the UK, where a company is based, so big surprise. But again, you can pick a, let's do neurosciences. You can pick a research field. So now, if I want to know, obviously there are an enormous number of research organizations in dimensions. But if I want to see where I place relative to my peer group, applying this group filter will bring those institutions to the top of the list. So I can see where, in this case, ASU places relative to their, what they consider their peer institutions in the field of neurosciences. So that's another way that, like, if you're doing high level institutional analysis and competitive intelligence, for example, this is one way to do it. And you can apply this group, obviously, not just to publications, but to funding. And I think this is really where people get interested, because they want to know, relative to their peers, where they're, how much funding they're getting in certain areas. And then I can dig into where my peer institutions are getting their funding from. So I could dig into OSU and find out who their major funders are, what they're getting the grants awarded for, who the researchers are that are being awarded those grants. So that there's a number of ways that high-level administration can use this to do, primarily competitive intelligence, largely looking at funding, again, identifying potential corporate partners via patents. I just want to walk through some of the searches that we did before. So on the slide, so you can see it live. So I'm going to pick sleep, title, and abstract. Again, because we have publications that go back, if I click this, you'll see the whole range. In this case, to 1830. Again, this is why I suggest applying the time filters. So we just want to look at recent publications, say over the last 3 years. I'm going to limit it to. So now we haven't applied any research organization or location information, but if I want to see the top researchers that are publishing the most in this field, I can quickly pop into analytical views and I can see these researchers where they are This Add to Dimensions committee will not appear in your version because I have a different funder version. We have funder clients that use this to identify reviewers for grant proposals. That's why there's a committee. And also publishers use this to find reviewers for publications. But at any rate, this is how you can identify researchers that have been publishing recently. Again, this is sorted by volume, but we have additional metrics. So I spoke about the FCR, which is the field citation ratio. We only calculate the FCR and the RCR after 2 years because we want to allow time for citations to accrue. RCR is a metric that Digital Science developed with the NIH, so it only applies to publications in PubMed. FCR is more broad, so it applies to more fields. I imagine RCR would be more relevant to your research. But if you're doing, for example, like some interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work on neurosciences and maybe social impacts, you might want to look at an FCR instead of an RCR because it will capture more publications that aren't in PubMed. You can also, again, look at research that's gotten attention. So if I look at these researchers this way, I can see the percentage of their publications related to my search that have received attention online. So if this is important to you, you might want to go with someone that has a high rate of attention for exposure to their research. And again, if you have an article abstract, right, and you're looking for a place to submit, I'm going to back out of the search. I am actually going to steal an abstract. So I'm just going to copy this entire abstract. And let's say this is my draft article abstract. Click abstract search, hit enter. And this is going to take a little bit of time because it's processing and extracting the terms. Well, that was pretty quick, actually. So now you're going to get, again, very similar content to this description. And if I'm looking to submit to a journal, I'm going to want to find out where very similar research is being published and how often it's being cited. So if you look at the citation, there's more publications in this journal, but the citation mean is 47.2. This Journal of Psychiatry is 176, which is ridiculous for a mean. But anyway, we give you these metrics so that you have some kind of context behind the citations that'll help inform where you might want to submit. So if we look at, actually, let's look at RCR. So again, you can see the RCR mean. So even though this is the top journal in terms of publication volume, if you look at the citation mean, the RCR mean, this is actually might potentially be a better journal to submit to. So being able to plop that abstract in and not have to construct a huge search or do a broad search by topic makes this tool, it is but far and away, as I said before, the most popular feature in Dimensions. Also, let's say that's a project description and I want to look at funding. I can now look, again, because it's searching across all content types, I can find out who the funders are that are funding highly similar research to this abstract that I've submitted. And again, I can see if they're funding more or less over time. So this has remained a pretty steady, you'll see it's at 2%, even though their overall budget is declining, they're actually funding proportionately about the same amount. And again, you can export these charts as an image, or you can export the data behind them if you wanted to do some additional analysis. And this is available for every funder in this annual review. Is there a question? Okay, no. So that, again, is the abstract search. Also, if I want to find out, figure out companies that are commercializing or filing patents, applications that are very similar to this, I can investigate that via patents, clinical trials. It's just a number of options, again, for you to get a very expansive view of everything that's going on around this very specific abstract. This one related to PTSD. I see a question in the chat. Oh, someone did unmute. Okay. So that's the abstract search. At this point, we have 10 minutes left, and I want to just leave that for questions. And again, we do have a session later today where it's going to be Q&A. So if you're coming to that session, and I hope you are, if you have specific things that you're thinking about doing and want to know how you can best do them in Dimensions, we're going to walk through those. It's a very open. I'm sorry, again, I'm a little sick today, I'm losing the word for it. A very open-ended session, so we can explore Dimensions and we can figure out how to best assist you with what you're trying to do.
Hi, Heidi, maybe I can ask a question.
Sure.
Regarding individual investigator records. So if you were to look up an individual and look at their profile and their grants and papers and so on, that information, does that get pulled from a single source regarding that individual? Or is
No.
The answer for number 6.45 is only 20%.
Okay, let's see. 6.45.
45.
I'm not sure what's happening right now. You want to give me a name?
120.
We can
It's
check.
not 120.
Oh, I think there's a couple of folks who have their.
I have to go grab the history thing.
Right, but
Can we just quickly read over the solution?
okay. So
Okay, I think we've solved the problem. Do you want to give me a name? And
Sure, you can use mine, Yasa. At the risk of it being inaccurate or too accurate, I don't know. I have no idea what to expect here. Okay.
So we're not pulling just your publication. So for any individual person, you can see everything that we have associated with you in every content type. So not just your publications, but your funding, any clinical trials we have associated with you. If you were an inventor on a patent, that would show up here. Datasets, again, we've just started, just added. There are links out to different, any source of information we can find about you, from ORCID, NIH, Researcher ID. This is a new one, actually, I haven't seen before, so that's kind of cool. We use this information to help disambiguate people, which is a nightmare for any database, especially because people move around. The current affiliation on a profile for any given person is calculated based on the last 3 years of their funding and publication data. So once we weight those, we weight that information to determine what your current affiliation is. So if you've just moved institutions, for example, it'll take a bit until you start producing from your new institution for that current affiliation to change. I hope that makes sense. See some more questions in the chat.
And I just want to add a little to that, Heidi, maybe you can weigh in on this too. So Dimensions is a data source that's gathering a lot of information from everywhere in an easy way. Well, easy for the user because you don't really have to do anything, but there's a trade-off with what you see. So Michael's profile may not have everything that it should, but it's gathering more than anybody could hope to. I mean, all data sources are going to have a lag time, or going to have some inaccuracies just for the sake of the data. So I don't know if you want to expand upon that a little bit, Heidi.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we pull in data from other sources. So if the data from the source that we pull in, for example, if you have a name variant, right, that we're not picking, you've decided to call yourself just by Yasa, for example, that might take us a while to combine those profiles. We err on the side of precision. So if we're not entirely sure that you are the same Michael Yasa as we see as on a clinical trial record, for example, because we don't have enough data points, perhaps affiliation is missing, we'll create another profile instead of, potentially erroneously combining that data and making it less valid. So, I mean, to Liz's points, obviously there are limitations to this. One thing to note, someone asked a question before about funding, and I wanted to quickly, Michael, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I did want to show you how you can find funders. So if you go to support and you go to about dimensions, there's a portion called about the grant data. This lists every funder we have in dimensions. The best way to search this is just like Command F and search for the funder. If you click on show details, it will show you the number of awards per year that we have for that particular funder. If you don't see a funder listed here that you think should be in here, let us know. We'll reach out to them and see if there's a way to get the data from them. It's free to them to give it to us. We don't charge them to give us valuable data, obviously. What I will say is, so the question about private foundations, you can look them up. You can't in this platform search by just private foundations versus federal, but you can search for particular foundations. Like if I searched for Robert Wood Johnson, there we go. So we have Robert Wood Johnson, and we can show you the range of grant data that we have for Robert Wood Johnson in dimensions. So this is where I would check if you're not sure if a funder is included or not in dimensions. The other thing you can do, again, is you can set your export format. So if you'd rather export by CSV, you can do that. Another awesome feature is you can link your ORCID profile, which I encourage everyone to have. I have one, even though I'm not a researcher. I have unbelievably published an article. You can connect your ORCID profile to your Dimensions account, which means when your publications appear in Dimensions, you can add them to your ORCID profile with one click, so there's no manual entry. We want to encourage that because it helps disambiguation for everyone, and it makes it easy for you to keep that profile up to date. So you'll see that Add to ORCID button here. And then where possible, we provide PDFs in platform, and it will show you how you're getting this PDF. So this is an open access article from Taylor and Francis. You can get the publication right in the platform. You don't have to go outside to the publisher site. You can download it, you can annotate it, you can get related figures and metrics. It's a really cool feature. Especially most of the open access content in Dimensions will have this available. If it doesn't, you'll just see a link that says open access, and that will lead you to the version. You can also view it at the publisher's site. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. I know it's a lot to take in at one time, but again, like these analytical views in my mind and the abstract search make this tool, it will just save you so much time, and, you know, in theory, money to use this database, because it is just so efficient. And again, we provide this analytical, high level, aggregated information at your fingertips. You don't have to export a bunch of, even though you can. I have a number of favorites. I'm going to get into this when we get into the collaboration session. But for each of the favorites, when you save a favorite, you can opt to be alerted to new content that matches your search. So every week, if you can create whatever search you want, save it as a favorite. In fact, I'm just going to make one up right now. This is a problem I'm currently suffering with. And I don't think that's unique in this day and age. I can now save this as a favorite, and it will give me an option. I can name it, and then I can elect to get email updates for new content related to my search. So the latest publications, the latest grants. This will soon expand to include all of the other content types, I think, except for policy documents. And so anyway, so you don't even have to go into the platform to find out the latest and greatest related to your search. Okay, there's a question in the chat. So there's different level of access. Yeah, so there's Dimensions Plus. Dimensions Plus does not have, you should all be able to access, or most of you should be able to access analytics. Dimensions Plus does, actually, let me show you what that looks like. It does not have as many of the visualizations as analytics does. It also doesn't have as many research categories. You don't have the ability to group. So it's limited to FORs, which again are much more broad. You can see them here. We pick this as the default because it is broad. So it does capture, for people that are doing social science stuff, it does capture that. But I think for most of your purposes, the RCDC codes are going to be the most relevant. The medical categories and FORs tend to be very broad. You can see here, there's not a lot of, I don't even see neurology in here. So that's the primary difference again. And if I go into analytical views, you're not going to see that timeline or heat map or anything like that. The data is exactly the same. So if I look at a researcher profile, it's going to show me the exact same thing as it would in the analytics. Likewise for an institutional profile. It's just some of the bells and whistles are not in Plus. They're in analytics, and that's because we find that most researchers this is totally fine for. And it works. When we're talking about like provost, dean level, research development, sponsored programs, those are the types of people that, want to have the grouping capability, want to have the trend, the timelines and the visualizations, and the extra research categories. Okay, we're over time. I'm apologizing right now. We'll see you very quickly, I think.
At quarter after. We'll start the next session at quarter after. We'll just take a quick break and come back and talk about the collaborative pieces of Dimensions.
But before we break, can I just make one quick comment? Mm-hmm. This was mentioned by Diana in the chat. Just to clarify to everyone in the meeting, UCI Brain is providing access to Dimensions Plus to anyone who signs up for an account with us. The analytics component, these are, we have a few of those accounts available, and we're providing them to teams that have submitted applications to the UCI Brain pilots. And even if they're not awarded the monetary funds for the pilot, we will still supply them with an account to help them build a team. And it'll be a little bit more with guidance from UCI Brain as well. So just wanted to clarify that because I know we went back and forth over Dimensions Plus versus Dimensions Analytics. Again, same data, just more features.
And my apologies. I was under the impression that that this was analytics. So, but again, it's essentially the same. But thank you.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
We'll break and we'll come back at 15.
Okay. Thank you.
At 15.